Hey, and welcome to another episode of Tiffany's Take, where I answer your questions right here on the podcast. Now, for this episode, I decided to do a feed drop. Feed drop in podcasting is where you take a episode from another podcast and you drop it right into yours. Now, this episode that I am doing this with is from when I was a guest on Podcast 360. And Podcast 360 is a cool concept where I get 3 questions that I have to answer from another podcast host, and I have 60 seconds to answer each question. So it was a really fun concept, and I figured it would be good to post on my podcast so that way you all can learn a little bit more about me, a little bit more about the podcast, and how I run things on this side. So I hope you enjoy, and if you enjoy me doing these feed drops, let me know, because then I can do more of them. So without further ado, here you go.
If you love this podcast, then wouldn't you love to know how it came to be? That's what we're asking your favorite podcast hosts on this week's episode of Podcast 360. Welcome to Podcast 360, powered by the Podcast Academy. In 3 questions answered in 60 seconds each, you'll experience a 360-degree view of podcasting from a lineup of industry experts. The hosts of your favorite podcasts will take turns interviewing each other, creating a chain of podcast knowledge and perspective. Let's meet our industry experts. Today's host is...
Hi, my name is Anthony Weaver. I'm the host of the About That Water podcast, where we help the sandwich generation build strong financial habits to have confidence in saving money, talking about money, and spending money with confidence. You've heard me last week when I was interviewed by Stephanie Gonzalez, host of the Crush Your Money Goals podcast.
And who is our guest this week?
Hey, my name is Tiffany Grant, and I am the host of Money Talk with Tiff, which is a financial education and business education platform. I just love to teach people how to make, spend, invest, and do all the things they love to do with money.
First, the game before the game. We ask our guests to share 2 truths and a lie. Our host will guess which is the lie, and we'll find out the answer together at the end of our conversation. Let's play Podcast 360.
Tiffany, I am glad that you came on to Podcast 360. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Well, every episode of Podcast 360 begins with a round of 2 truths and a lie. Have you played that game before?
I have in person.
Okay. Well, we're going to make this fun and virtual. So, for those of you who are not familiar, your job is to tell me 3 facts about yourself, and I will make the best guess on which one is the lie, and we'll reveal it all at the end of the conversation. Are you ready?
I am ready. Let's go.
Alrighty, so go ahead on and give me your 3 facts.
1, I live in Jamaica. 2, I interview people for the podcast all year long. And 3, I release 2 episodes a week.
I would like to go with number 2, that you interview all year round.
We shall see.
Alrighty. Now it's time to get into the 360 portion of Podcast 360. I'm going to ask you 3 questions about podcasting, and you'll have 60 seconds to answer each. Once we get through the round of questions, you can pick one of the subjects and talk about it in greater detail. Ready to go?
Let's go.
Let's make it happen. So, question 1. What was the moment you realized that you wanted to start Money Talk with Tiff podcast?
So the moment I realized that I wanted to start Money Talk with Tiff, the podcast, was when I realized there was so many people out there doing cool things with their money. And Money Talk with Tiff started as a blog back in 2017. And so that's just a monologue. It's just my perspective on everything. And so when I started in 2019 with the podcast, I said, let me bring on people so they can share their stories and how they invest, how they spend, how they save, and things like that. And so that's how I came up with the Money Talk with Tiff podcast. And that was the whole premise behind it, because I believe that the way out of poverty is ideas. So I want to spread as many ideas as possible. And so that's how it was born.
Awesome. Okay, so question number 2. You have shown me a few tools to stay consistent in podcasting, because I started in 2020 and you've been doing it for quite some time. You're not going to go that far. But which tools do you feel has had the most impact?
Now, you know me pretty well, and that is a loaded question because I love technology and I kind of have an addiction. So, I will say when it comes to podcasting, I would say Riverside is one. That's how I record all of my episodes, and it's been invaluable. It has the best audio quality, according to my editor, who has been with me for so long. We tried so many different things. So, I would say one. Cast Magic is two. That helps with all my show notes and everything, titles, and it's just a really powerful program, and I love it. And let me see, can I throw in three? Three, I would say WordPress, only because I do blog posts with every episode, so I'll leave it at that.
Awesome. All right. So, question 3. Since traveling to another country with your children, how has your views on podcasting impact the way that you do business?
That is a good question as well. I will say that it hasn't had too much of an impact. However, I do less video work. So I do less video podcasting, mostly audio from my platform. And then I'm very selective when it comes to doing video for other people's platforms. And that's because I don't have the same setup that I have here. And so it makes things a little more complicated to do video. So I would say that's really the only change that I've had in regards to podcasting when it comes to being in another place.
Well, Tiffany, you did a great job keeping those answers under 60 seconds. Now, was there something that you want to kind of expand on out of those 3?
Yeah, so of course, I'm going to go with technology.
Of course. Of course.
Of
Of course.
course, because I tell people all the time, technology is invaluable if you know how to use it right. And you already know what you're trying to do and you know what process you're trying to improve. And so I tell fellow podcasters, I'm like, know what your process is and then start implementing technology to help you with that process. So there's so much technology out there to do so many different things. And so once you realize what you don't enjoy or what takes too long for you, then you start looking for the software to do it. Because if you try to do it the other way and just start getting a whole bunch of software like I do, then you'll end up wasting a ton of
That's so true.
money. Wasting a ton of money. And so I go through this so you don't have to. So, if people have any questions about software, I'm happy to help. But also, that is my tip for fellow podcasters. Just make sure you have your process down and then use that to figure out what software you need.
Yeah, one of the things that I'm a big fan of is working harder than smarter, because you don't know what you don't know until you need to know. So it's like, let's make sure that we're getting what we need to improve our lives, especially as indie podcasters, and just doing it ourselves as solopreneurs, trying to do the nuts and bolts of everything until we get our systems down, because these tools are getting expensive.
Listen,
And
I know I've spent way too much in tech every year. And that's why I said I have an addiction, but that's why you can hear it from the horse's mouth. Like, don't do the same thing I do. Really understand what you're getting into. But also, I will say farm out as much as possible that you can afford, whatever you don't like doing. I got an editor like a year or so in, and it was the best decision I ever made because I don't enjoy editing. And so that really pushed me to be able to release, as often as I do because somebody else is doing the part that I don't like. I was not consistent when I was editing. I would go like 3 months without without releasing. And it's not that I didn't have the content. I had the content. It was just sitting on my computer. It's just that I didn't like editing. And so that helped me with my consistency.
Podcast 360 will be back in just a moment. And we're back with Podcast 360.
yeah, you helped me out with my consistency because of another tool, Eddie from Headliner tool. It's been helpful because I hate doing show notes, and that tool has really helped me out with the show notes because it takes so much time to do that part, and the blogging piece takes forever, and it does all the fun things. So I just now had to work on my newsletter. So that's the next thing I'll probably outsource.
Yes. And so Eddie, for people that are not familiar, anybody can use. And I will say, Anthony, check out Cast Magic if you have a little budget, because it just takes Eddie to a whole nother level, and it has a ton of stuff in there.
Oh, man. All right. I'll definitely have to take that out because you always put me on game, and I appreciate it. we coming down to the tail end of the show. Before we go, there's one thing left to do. It's time to find out which of the 3 facts is the lie. For my final guess, I think I'm going to stick with my original answer, which is number 2.
And you would be absolutely right. This was really difficult because I knew I wasn't going to stump you because you know me too well. But I do not interview people for the podcast all year long. I batch record pretty heavily. And so I only record for, I would say total about 3 or 4 months out the year. And then the rest of the year, I'm not recording at all unless it's for my solo episodes.
Yeah, you must be pretty popular.
Yeah. And honestly, I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I have to tell a lot of people no, too. I'm constantly being bombarded with interview requests. And that's another thing when it comes to podcasting. You have to protect your platform and your audience. And so do your due diligence when people reach out and make sure that they are on the up and up and their topic is interesting. I'm at 350 something episodes. And at that point, I can't keep talking about the same thing over and over. Like, it has to be something unique that you're coming with.
That is so true. I know if we have more time, we might have to have you back on, at least on my show, just to talk about this, because this is actually something I would like to dive more into on how to protect your audience. But Tiffany, this is not my show. So thank you again for being my guest. It has been fun. Can you let the listeners know where they can find you, really? And also talk about like your social media pages, your websites, or wherever else you hang out at.
Yeah, so I have another addiction, and that's social media. So you can find me on all platforms at Money Talk with T. You can go to my website, moneytalkwitht.com, where you'll still see the blog. I'm still posting. So I'm keeping that strong. And then wherever you're listening to this podcast, you can listen to Money Talk with Tiff. Just search it in the little search box and I'll come up.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Tiffany, for being my guest. And thanks to the Podcast 360 team for having us.
Yes, thank you. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to Podcast 360, where you experience a 360-degree view of podcasting. Special thanks to the Podcast Academy and DCP Entertainment. Follow us on social media at The Ambies and at DCP Official on Instagram. And subscribe wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss an episode.